Somebody on the left this morning on Twitter presented the greatest pro-abortion argument of all time. And then I refuted it, and then he blocked me. So I will explain to you why this was not, in fact, the greatest pro-abortion argument of all time, and why it is that people think it was. We will also, okay, so we begin today with an argument that was going around Twitter this morning. I woke up, and there was a tweet storm that was going around. It has now been liked almost 19,000 times and retweeted 9,000 times. It's a big tweet, right? Especially from a guy who no one's ever heard of. This guy's name is Patrick Tomlinson. I would tell you how many followers he has, except that he blocked me. So Patrick Tomlinson is apparently the author of something called the Ark Trilogy. He's a sci-fi author, calls himself a comic. I'm going to read you his nasty little tweet storm, and then I'm going to explain why it is so appealing on the surface to pro-choicers, and then I'm going to explain why it makes no sense. So here's his argument in favor of abortion. And it just drips with condescension and disdain. Anyone who disagrees with him is a fool and a liar. I'm so sick of that attitude. I really am. If I haven't made that clear with regard to Jimmy Kimmel, I'm going to make it clear now with regard to Patrick Tomlinson. Here's what he tweeted, quote, "Whenever abortion comes up, I have a question I've been asking for 10 years now of the Life Begins at Conception crowd. In 10 years, no one has ever answered it honestly." Ooh. Then he says, "It's a simple scenario with two outcomes." Wow, I mean, just the brilliance this guy must carry in his head. It's just mind-boggling. He says, no one ever wants to pick one because the correct answer destroys their argument. There is a correct answer, which is why the pro-life crowd hates the question. Here it is. Are you ready? So good. You're in a fertility clinic. Why isn't important? The fire alarm goes off. You run for the exit. As you run down the hallway, you hear a child screaming from behind a door. You throw open the door and find a 5-year-old child crying for help. Exciting, no? They're in one corner of the room. In the other corner, there, by the way, is spelled They''re. The genius writer knows. They're in one corner of the room. In the other corner, you spot a frozen container labeled 1,000 viable human embryos. The smoke is rising. You start to choke. You know you can grab one or the other, but not both before you succumb to smoke inhalation and die, saving no one. Dun, 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 dun. Do you A, save the child, or B, save the 1,000 embryos? There is no C. C means you all die. Dun, 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 dun. He says, in a decade of arguing with anti-abortion people about the definition of human life, I have never gotten a single straight A or B answer to this question, and I never will. They will never answer honestly because we all instinctively understand the right answer is A. A human life is worth more than 1,000 embryos, or 10,000, or 1,000,000, because they are not the same, not morally, not ethically, not biologically. This question absolutely eviscerates their arguments, and their refusal to answer confirms that they know it to be true. No one, anywhere, actually believes an embryo is equivalent to a child. That person does not exist. They are lying to you. They are lying to you to try and evoke an emotional response, a paternal response using false equivalency. No one believes life begins at conception. No one believes embryos are babies or children. Those who claim to are trying to manipulate you so they can control women. Don't let them. Use this question to call them out. Reveal them for what they are. Demand they answer your question, and when they don't, slap that big old scarlet P of the patriarchy on them. The end. Wow. Mind. Pew. Blown. Just amazing. I mean, just the utter genius of this guy. If I had thought of this example, like if I had thought of this hypothetical stupid question, like, I don't know, 10 years ago, totally would have changed my worldview. I would have voted for Hillary Clinton, and I'd be wearing a sticker with a pussy hat on it. Okay, so let's put aside the fact that this guy's obviously a douchebag. The commenters on the Twitter thread are properly puzzled. The reason they're properly puzzled is because he is correct that your moral intuition suggests that you save the 5-year-old child and not the box marked 1,000 viable embryos. Here is why this does not prove the point he thinks that it proves. There are many reasons why this does not even come close to proving the point he thinks it proves. He thinks this proves that human embryos aren't life. He thinks that this proves that we are all liars when we say that human embryos are human life. He says that this proves that human embryos are not babies. He says that this proves that we are all liars. Okay, so here is why this is not true in any sense. So here are 4 reasons. First, moral instinct does not always mean you thought things through. So we have lots of moral instincts. Those moral instincts may be good, they may be right, they may be wrong. That does not provide a moral logic. Okay, just because you have a moral feeling does not mean that the logic is well thought out. So, for example, here's another famous thought experiment. I love thought experiments. I think they're fun. So that's why I'm focusing on this, because I think that it's good for you to get better at thought experiments, and it's fun for me to go through them. So here's another famous thought experiment. This, of course, is the trolley problem. Everyone knows of the trolley car problem. This is where you are standing on a railroad track, a trolley car track, and the track is right at the fork. Okay, you're standing right at the fork. It goes to the right and it goes to the left. On the left, there is Nell, who's tied to the track. And on the right, there are 5 people who are tied to the track. Okay? Do you pull the switch and switch the trolley car from the one that is going to kill the 5 people to the one that is just going to kill Nell? Most people say yes. Right? Okay, pretty easy answer, right? This is a utilitarian answer. We will save the 5 instead of saving the 1. Okay, now here is the more famous trolley car question. You are now standing on a bridge over the trolley car track. And on the track is tied Nell and 5 other people. So there's 6 people tied to the trolley car track. You're standing above on a bridge. And up next to you is standing Michael Moore. Okay, so now, if you take Michael Moore and you push him over the side of the bridge and the trolley car is stopped do you throw Michael Moore over the top of the bridge? Most people say no. Most people say there's a moral difference between me throwing a switch and me pushing somebody physically off a bridge to their doom. That's a moral intuition, but can you justify it? The answer is probably not. And what this demonstrates is that most people's moral intuition is not necessarily a thought through logic. And let's give another example, okay? We can give all sorts of these thought experiments proving that the moral intuition goes the other way. So, for example, let's say that instead of a 5-year-old and a box of 1,000 random viable embryos, it was a box of 2 embryos, and they were your children, right? You were infertile and your wife was infertile, but somehow, through a miracle, they've created 2 embryos that are your children, your only possibility of having children, and they are viable, so we know that they will implant and be fine, right? That's the premise of his question. So, do you save the embryos or do you save the 5-year-old, the random 5-year-old? A lot of people would say save the embryos now because they're your children. That's a moral intuition. Does it make it right? I assume Tomlinson would say no. That just because you had a moral feeling one way or another doesn't mean that the feeling is justified. And let's make it even easier. Okay, let's say that you have your 5-year-old, right? It's your child, and it's a 5-year-old now, right? It's my daughter, and she's 3.5 years old. And in the next room, there are 100 screaming adults. And I can only save 1, right? Who do I save? My 3.5-year-old or the 100 screaming adults? Most parents would say they would save their 3.5-year-old. Does that make that a moral choice? Okay, this is the premise of every 24 episode ever. Right? It's always Kim Bauer, that idiot, getting captured, and then Jack has to decide whether to save the entire city of Los Angeles or his daughter. Right? It's the premise to every ticking bomb thriller is, it's Spider-Man, right? Mary Jane is falling off, and Spider-Man has to save Mary Jane, or he can save the bus full of screaming children. Which does he choose? And naturally, the producers allow him to get away with saving both, but his tendency is to save Mary Jane, right? Does that make it immoral? Is that a moral decision, or is it just a moral impetus? So just because you feel like you want to save the 5-year-old, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're correct. Okay, second point on this stupid hypothetical. It doesn't actually reveal the value of embryonic life. So we can agree with Tomlinson that you should save the 5-year-olds rather than the box of embryos on a moral level, and still that would not admit that embryonic life is meaningless. It would just mean that you care more about the 5-year-old life than you care about the embryonic life, whether they're viable or not. In fact, we can imagine a counter scenario where you care more about the embryonic life than the 5-year-old. So let's take a sci-fi scenario, since Tomlinson is a sci-fi writer. Let's take the sort of Battlestar Galactica scenario, okay? The fate of humanity rests on this one box full of 1,000 embryos that have males and females in them. And now there's a fire on your spaceship. And you can save a screaming 5-year-old, the only child, or, right, it's just you and the 5-year-old. There are no other people alive, right? That's the end of the human story. You can save those 1,000 embryos, and you can ensure that they are born from artificial wombs and they will live and create a new human species, or you can save this one 5-year-old and you can both die alone in the middle of space. Which do you do? Right? So again, every sci-fi movie ever says you save the box of embryos. Does that mean that the 5-year-old is no longer a human life? Right? Because what he's doing is he's creating a false binary and then saying whichever one you choose, the other one's not a human life. I've just given you a bunch of false binaries and then said whichever one you choose is still a human life. So clearly that isn't true. So next point on this idiotic argument that the left thinks destroys all of the various arguments in favor of the pro-life movement. Okay, most pro-lifers already acknowledge that an already born human life takes priority over a not yet born human life. How do we know this? Because the vast majority of religions, in fact, all that I know of, including Catholic doctrine, say that if you have to choose between the life of the mother and the life of the unborn child, you choose the life of the mother. This is, in Catholic doctrine, to give a perfect example from Catholic doctrine, because Catholics are the most strict on this, the doctrine is, let's say that you're a woman and you have uterine cancer, and chemo and surgery are the only way to prevent you from dying from this uterine cancer, and the side effect of the chemo is that it's going to kill the embryo. Are you allowed to get the chemo? Catholic doctrine says absolutely, and the doctor didn't do anything wrong. Why? Because we value the life of the mother, and you are not actively killing the child, you are passively killing the child. It's a secondary effect of the chemo that you're trying to do to save a life. The same exact premise applies in this particular hypothetical that Tomlinson puts forward. And finally, the hypothetical isn't reality. Okay, this is the part that's the stupidest. I'm not even arguing with the hypothetical now. The hypothetical is saying 5-year-old child versus embryos, choose. When women get abortions, they don't have a choice between 5-year-old child and the embryo. They are just choosing to kill the embryo. An abortion doctor doesn't have a 5-year-old child with a gun to their head in the next room and says, well, I've saved that 5-year-old. I'm going to kill this baby now. Instead, the doctor just says, would you like to kill the baby? And the woman says yes, and they're done. So it doesn't hold in any way. But this is what the left likes to do. They pose false hypotheticals that don't actually prove their point, and then they say, if you answer me, you've proved my point. Well, I answered him. I'd save the 5-year-old. It still didn't prove his point for all the reasons that I just said. So I said all of this on Twitter, and then he basically accused me of being gay and blocked me. So well done, Patrick Tomlinson. You've demonstrated fully how genius you are. No one could give you a straight answer. You are just an epic intellect. I'm stunned by the fact that no one has taken your genius at face value.